It was answered by a constable. "Good morning. Do you know if Miss Troy is down yet?" "She's in the library, sir." Troy, in slacks and a pullover, looked as if she had not slept. "I'm very sorry indeed to worry you at the crack of dawn. I want to ask you if the caravan in the garage belongs to you." "Yes, why?" "When did you last use it, please?" About a fortnight ago. We all went out in it to Catswood for a picnic and a day's sketching." "Do you know how much petrol there was in the tank when you got back?" "Must have been more than half full, I should think. I got it filled up when we started, and we only went about 40 miles there and back." "What does she do to the gallon?" 20. "And the tank holds 8 gallons. "Yes, it's just over a quarter full this morning." Troy stared at him. Then, as her eyes widened, "Garcia!" she cried out. "You think Garcia took it, don't you?" "What makes you so sure of that?" "Why, because I've puzzled my own wits half the night to think how he got his stuff away. The superintendent here told me none of the local carriers knew anything about it. Of course Garcia took it. Trust him not to pay a carrier if he could get his stuff there free. If this warehouse place is somewhere in London, he could do the trip easily if it were late at night, couldn't he?" "Yes. Dear me, I shall have to do a sum. Your car does 20 to the gallon and holds 8 gallons. You went 40 miles, starting with a full tank. Therefore there should be 6 gallons, and there are only about 3. That leaves a discrepancy of 60 miles or so. I do wish he'd told one of you where this damned warehouse was." "But he did. At least Seacliff said this morning she thought she remembered he said something about it being near Holloway." "Good Lord, why didn't she say so last night?" "Why does she always behave in the most tiresome manner one could possibly conceive?" "Oh, I'm nearly as bad, not to have told you at once." "You are nothing like as bad." Troy rang the bell, which was answered by Hipkin, a large man with a small head and flat feet. "Ask Miss Seacliff if she'll come and see me." Seacliff strolled in, dressed in black trousers and a magenta sweater. "Good morning, Miss Seacliff," said Alleyn. "Do you want to be alone, Mr. Alleyn?" asked Troy. No, I just want to ask Miss Seacliff about this Holloway business." "Oh," said Seacliff, "you mean the place where Garcia's going to sculp?" "Yes. Did he tell you it was somewhere near Holloway?" "Yes, he did. I'd forgotten. He asked me if I would come and see him while he was working. Then he said it was near Holloway because I remember I asked him if he thought he'd be safe. I said I knew better than to spend an afternoon with him in a deserted studio, but I might get Basil to drive me there, and, of course, that made him quite livid with rage." "Did he tell you exactly where it was?" "He drew up a map, but I'm afraid I've lost it." "Then I think that's all, thank you, Miss Seacliff." She got up, frowned, and closed her eyes for a moment. "What's the matter?" asked Troy. "I've got another of these filthy headaches. I've been getting them lately." "You're looking a bit white," said Troy more kindly. "Why don't you lie down? Would you like some aspirin?" "Basil gave me his last night, thanks." She took out her mirror and looked at herself with intense concentration. "I look bloody," she said, and walked out of the room. "She always like that?" asked Alleyn. "Pretty much. She's spoilt. She'd have been comparatively easy to live with if she hadn't got that lovely face. She is beautiful, you know." "Oh, magnificent," agreed Alleyn absently. He was looking at Troy, at the delicate sparseness of her head, the straight line of her brows, and the generous width between her grey-green eyes. "I must get on with my odious job," he said. "May I use your telephone?" "Yes, of course." He turned at the doorway and said, "Lady Alleyn's compliments to Miss Troy, and if Miss Troy would like to sample the amenities of Dane's Lodge, Lady Alleyn will be very happy to offer them." "Your mother is very kind," said Troy, "but I think it would be better not. Will you thank her from me? Please say I am very grateful indeed." Alleyn bowed. "I'm grateful to you too," said Troy. "Are you? That is rather dangerously nice of you. Goodbye." Alleyn found Fox, who had renewed his acquaintance with the Hipkins and Sadie, and drove him back through the teeming rain to Dane's Lodge for breakfast. "I've had a bit of a yarn with Ethel Jones," said Fox. Ethel? Oh, yes, the help from the village. What has she got to say for herself? Well, sir, it seems that Ethel and her boy took a walk on Friday night down the lane. They passed by the studio window on their way home from the pictures at about 11:30. There were lights going in the studio, but the blind was down. They stopped in the shadow of the trees to have a bit of a cuddle, as you might put it. Ethel says she glanced down the lane and saw someone outside the studio window. Did she, by gum? She says he seemed to be wearing a raincoat and a cap or beret of some sort. He was standing quite close to the window, Ethel reckons, and was caught by a streak of light coming through the blind. I asked her about the face, of course, but she says it was in shadow. She remembers that there was a small patch of light on the cap. There's a hole in the blind, said Alleyn. Is that so, sir? Well, that might account for it, then. Ethel says the rest of the figure was in shadow. She says the man turned aside and disappeared into the darker shadow, and they could just hear his footfall as he walked away. Well, I went into the lane to see if I could pick up his prints, but this downpour about finished the lane as far as we're concerned. I know. Anything else? No, they ambled off home. Hello, sir, what's up? Alleyn had pulled up and now began to turn the car in the narrow lane. Sorry, Fox, but we're going back to have a look at the hole in the blind. And back to the studio they went. Alleyn tied a thread to the light nearest the window and stretched the thread through the hole to Fox, who drew it tight and held it against his diaphragm. You see? Said Alleyn. Yes, said Fox. I'm 6'2" in my socks, and it hits me somewhere, let's see, about the end of the sternum. That's right, sir. Good enough. We'll take a look at night. Let's go and have breakfast. And a few minutes later they joined Nigel Bathgate at breakfast. You might have told me you were going out, complained Nigel. I wouldn't dream of interrupting your beauty sleep, said Alleyn. We're for London in 20 minutes. May I come with you? I've telephoned the office. I'll make a bit of an entrance with this story. In the car, Alleyn and Fox thumbed over their notebooks and occasionally exchanged remarks. Nigel, next to the chauffeur, spent the time in pleasurable anticipation of his reception at the office. They cut through from Shepherd's Bush to Holland Road, and thence into Chelsea. Alleyn gave the man directions which finally brought them into a narrow and not very smart cul-de-sac behind Smith Street. You can put me down here, said Alleyn. Goodbye, Bathgate. Meet you at the yard somewhere round noon, Fox. He waved his hand and crossed the street to a set of flats that only just escaped the appearance of a lodging-house. Alleyn inspected the row of yellowing cards inside the front door. Miss Bobby O'Dorn's room was up 2 flights. He passed the inevitable charwoman with her bucket of oil and soot, and tapped at Miss O'Dorn's door. A voice called out, All right! There were bumping noises, followed by the sound of bare feet on thin carpet. Who is it? May I speak to Miss O'Dorn? Called Alleyn. I've an important message for her. For me? Said the voice in more refined accents. Wait a moment, please. The door opened a few inches and then widely enough to admit the passage of a mop of sulphur-coloured curls and a not unattractive face. I'm sorry to disturb you so early, said Alleyn. It's about Sonia Gluck. Miss O'Dorn's bed-sitting room looked a little as if it had been suddenly slapped up and bounced into a semblance of tidiness. Sit down, she said, and make yourself at our place. It's not Buckingham Palace with knobs on, but you can't do much on chorus work, and hello, girls, have you heard the news? I was going to make a cup of coffee. How does that strike you? It sounds delightful, said Alleyn. She lit her gas ring and clapped a saucepan over it. By the way, you haven't told me who you are. My name's Roderick Alleyn. I'm afraid... Roderick Alleyn sounds pretty good. Well, if you'll excuse my freshness, you look a bit more Eton and Oxford than most of Sonia's boyfriends. Are you an artist? No, I'm a policeman. A policeman? Oh, go on, you're kidding. Miss O'Dorn, I'm an official of Scotland Yard. She looked sharply at him. Here, what's wrong? She said. Was Miss Gluck a very close friend of yours? Asked Alleyn gently. Was? What do you mean, was? Here, has anything happened to Sonia? I'm afraid so. Oh, God, she's not... Yes. Her pert little face had gone white under the makeup. What had she done? She said. She hadn't done anything. I think I know what you mean. She was going to have a child.
Yes, I know that all right. Well, what happened?
Alleyn told her as kindly as possible. She made the coffee as she listened to him, and her distress was so unaffected that he felt himself warm to her.
God, I can't believe it. Murdered?
She stirred her coffee and stared at Alleyn. Suddenly she made a jab at him with her spoon.
Garcia, she said.
Alleyn waited.
She brought him up here once or twice, and I said to her, "You watch your business with that gentleman." I said, "In my opinion, he's a very dirty bit of work, and I don't mind who hears me." Well, I mean to say, letting a girl as good as keep him. And when the spot of trouble comes along, it's thanks for the buggy ride, it was okay while it lasted. Had she tried the funny business with the kid? You know?
I don't think so. Alleyn took Miss O'Dorn's letter from his pocket and handed it to her. We found this in her room. I think I may as well tell you that we know she got £100 from Mr. Basil Pilgrim.
Did he tell you?
Yes. Was that the plan you refer to in this letter?
Since you're asking, Mr. Clever, it was. Pilgrim's had his fun, and Sonia didn't see why he shouldn't pay for it.
But the child was not Pilgrim's.
Oh, no, dear, but for all he knew.
Yes, I see. What did she do with his cheque?
Oh, she cashed it and gave the money to Garcia, dear. Asked him if they couldn't get married straight away, and Garcia said £100 wasn't enough to marry with.
Hadn't she got anything out of Malmsley?
Listen, Mr. Blake, aren't you wonderful? How did you get onto the marmalade stuff?
Alleyn folded his arms and raised his eyebrows. I have my methods. What happened when she offered to sell Malmsley his own book?
Wouldn't give more than £5, dear, and Sonia stuck out for 20. She said she'd give him the weekend to think it over. She didn't mind waiting. It wasn't as if she hadn't got...
Miss O'Dorn stopped short, gave Alleyn another of her sharp glances, and lit a cigarette. Hadn't got what? Asked Alleyn.
Look here. What's wrong with a girl getting her own back like Sonia did?
Well, it was blackmail, you know.
Was it? Isn't that a pity, I don't suppose? Look, Roddy, you don't mind me calling you Roddy, do you?
I'm delighted, said Alleyn.
Well, look, if what Sonia did was blackmail, I don't want to let everybody know the dirt about her after she's gone.
You don't want her murderer to get off, do you?
Do I look funny?
Well, then, had Garcia any more tricks up his sleeve? Miss O'Dorn twisted her fingers together. If you know anything more about Garcia, I do beg of you to tell me what it is.
Yeah, and get a permanent shop where Sonia's gone. It's no good, dear. I'm not in on this act.
I promise you that no harm...
No, dear, there's nothing doing. Have you arrested him?
No, he's gone on a walking tour.
That's a scream. I bloody well don't think. Pardon my refinement, said Miss O'Dorn.
Alleyn went thoughtfully to Scotland Yard. He saw his assistant commissioner and went over the case with him. Then he went to his office. Presently Fox came in. Alleyn related the gist of his interview with Miss O'Dorn. "What about yourself?" he asked when he had finished. "Any news, Brer Fox?"
"The city's been set going on the warehouse business. It's a bit of a job and no mistake. According to Miss Troy's reckoning, we've got 60 miles to account for. It's 20 miles to Shepherd's Bush from the house, there and back 40. Of course, he might not have come in by the Uxbridge Road, but it's by far the most direct route, and it would be the one he was familiar with. That leaves us a radius of 10 miles, roughly, from Shepherd's Bush to wherever the warehouse is. As the crow flies, Holloway Prison is only about 5 miles from Shepherd's Bush, but the shortest way by road would be nearer 9. Of course, it's all very loose," added Fox, looking over his spectacles at Alleyn, "but so's our information."
"Very loose. Well, Fox, we'd better get a move on. We're going to spend a jolly day checking up alibis. I'll take Miss Troy's and Miss Bostock's to begin with. You start off with young Hatchett and Phillida Lee. If we get done today, we'll run down to Boxover in the morning and see the people with whom Pilgrim and Miss Seacliff stayed on Friday night." He opened a drawer in his desk and took out the photograph of the group at Tatler's End House. "How tall is Garcia?" he asked. 5'9", according to the statement Blackman gave us, yes. Pilgrim looks about 2.5 inches taller in this photograph, doesn't he? Ormeron, Hatchett, and Garcia all are within an inch of each other. Miss Bostock, Miss Seacliff, and Miss Lee are much shorter. The model is a little taller than Miss Bostock, but not as tall as the others. Miss Troy is taller than the first batch, but about 2 inches shorter than Pilgrim. Pilgrim is the tallest of the lot. The desk telephone rang.
"It's me," said Nigel's voice winningly. "I'd like to come and see you, Alleyn."
"Very well, come up. I've got a job for you." Alleyn hung up the receiver. "It's Bathgate. I'll send him round to get an exclusive story from Miss Bobby O'Dorn. There's just a remote hope she may become less discreet under the influence of free publicity. I'm damn well positive she's keeping something up her sleeve about the blackmailing activities." He moved restlessly about the room. "Something missing," he said. "I'm positive there's something missing. Let's get Bailey's further report on the prints, shall we?" Alleyn rang through to Bailey's department. In a minute or two he appeared with a quantity of photographs which he laid on Alleyn's desk. "These are from the empty whisky bottle under Garcia's bed, the stool he used for his work, and the windowsill. These," he pointed to a second group, "come from bits of clay that were lying about the floor. They're made by the same fingers as the first lot. I've marked them Garcia. Here's the ones off the opium box and the pipe. 4 of those I've identified as Mr. Malmsley's. The others are Garcia's. Here's a photograph of the clay pellet I found in the drape. Garcia again. This set's off the edge of the throne. There were lots of prints there. Some of them Mr. Hatchett's, some of Mr. Pilgrim's, and some of the French blokes. This Mr. Ormerin. They seem to have had blue paint on their fingers, which was useful. But this set is Garcia's again, and I found it on top of the others." Bailey produced another photograph. "I got that from the drape." "Garcia," said Alleyn and Fox together. "I reckon it is," said Bailey. "We'd never have got it if it hadn't been for the clay. There's no prints on the knife, but there's a smudge of blue. You may remember there were the same blue smudges on the throne and the easel ledge that was used to hammer in the dagger. Now this print we got from the bit of paint rag that you suggested was used to wipe off the prints. Some of the paint on the rag was only half dry and took a good impression. It matches the paint smudges on the knife, blue." "Garcia's." "That's correct, sir." "This about settles it, Mr. Alleyn," said Fox. "That Garcia laid the trap, I agree with you," said Alleyn, "and I'm going down to Brixton." "Is that a joke?" asked Fox suspiciously. "No, Fox." "Brixton? Why Brixton?" "Sit down for a minute," said Alleyn, "and I'll tell you." The following afternoon, Alleyn turned wearily into the last land and estate agent's office in Brixton. A young man advanced upon him. "Yes, sir, what can I have the pleasure of doing for you?" "If you will, and if you can, tell me of any vacant warehouses in this district, or of any warehouses that have let part of themselves to artists. As you will probably have guessed, I'm an officer of Scotland Yard. Here's my card. I'd better show you my list of all the places I have already inspected." The list was a long one. The blond young man ran through it, muttering to himself. "Now, there's Solly and Perkins, big place, and there's Anderson's Shirt Factory, and Lacker and Lampton's Used Car Depot, that's in Gulper Row, opposite the prison. Quite in your line, Inspector." He laughed shrilly. "Damn funny," agreed Alleyn. "Lacker and Lampton's foreman was in here the other day. He's taken a house from us. Now, he did say something about there being a lot of room round at their place." "Could you give me the foreman's name?" "McCulley's the name, Ted McCulley." "Thank you very much indeed," said Alleyn. He departed hurriedly. A fine drizzle had set in, and already the light had begun to fade. Alleyn turned up the collar of his raincoat, pulled down the brim of his hat, and strode off in the direction of Brixton Prison. Lacker and Lampton's was at the far end. It was a barn of a place, and the ground floor was half full of spare parts. Alleyn asked for Mr. Ted McCulley, and in a minute or two a giant in oil-soaked dungarees came out of a smaller workshop, wiping his hands on a piece of waste. "Yes, sir?" he asked cheerfully. "I'm looking for an empty room with a good light to use as a painting studio," Alleyn began. "I called in at the estate agents. They said you might have something. Have you any vacant rooms that would do to paint in?" "Not here, we haven't, but it's a funny thing you should ask. You see, there's a bit of a storehouse round the corner that would do you down to the ground. Skylight, paraffin heater, electric light, plenty of room. It was taken by an artist like yourself, a gentleman by the name of Gregory." "Is he in his studio this afternoon?" "Hasn't been there for 3 months. He's in Hong Kong." "Indeed," murmured Alleyn. "Would he sublet, do you know?"
I don't know whether he would, but he can't. He promised the loan of it to someone else. I see. Then somebody else is using it? That's where the funny part comes in. He isn't. Never turned up. What was this other man's name, do you know? Have I heard it now? Ruminated Mr. McCulley, absently accepting one of Alleyn's cigarettes. Wait a bit now. It was a funny sort of name. Reminded me of the rubbish van. Garbage? Garbage. That's the name, or nearly. Something like Garcia, perhaps? That's it. Garcia. Look here, Alleyn said. I wish you'd just let me have a look at this place, will you, in case there is a chance of my getting it? Well, suppose there's nothing against that. Mr. Macaulay got a key from behind a door, hooked an old tarpaulin over his shoulders, and led the way out of the garage by a side door into a narrow alley. It was now raining heavily. Nasty weather, said Mr. Macaulay. It's only a step. They turned to the left into a wider lane. Macaulay stopped in front of a pair of rickety double doors fastened with a padlock and chain. Here we are, sir. Just half a tick and I'll have her open. She's a bit stiff. The key grated in the lock, the chain rattled, and Macaulay dragged the reluctant doors back in their grooves. Darkish, he said. I'll turn up the light. It was very dark inside, the far end quite lost in shadow. Macaulay's hand fumbled along the wall. There was a click, and a dull yellow globe, thick with dust, came to life. A few canvases stood at intervals with their faces to the wall. Halfway down there was a large studio easel, and beyond it stood a packing case with a few odd chairs and some shadowy bundles. Beyond that again, deep in shadow, Alleyn could distinguish the corner of a table. An acrid smell hung on the air. Macaulay walked on towards the dark. Kind of lonesome, isn't it? He said. Bit of a smell, too. Wait a moment, said Alleyn, but Macaulay did not hear him. Cripes! What stink! You'd think he'd... His voice stopped. Macaulay, don't move. Alleyn strode swiftly down the room. Is someone sitting at the table? Macaulay whispered. In the shadow cast by the packing case, Alleyn saw the table. The man who sat at it leant across the top and stared at them. His chin seemed to be on the surface of the table. His arms were stretched so far that his hands reached the opposite edge. Alleyn had a torch in his pocket. He groped for it. The sharp beam of light ended in the man's face. It was the face of a gargoyle. The eyeballs started from their sockets. The protruding tongue was sulphur yellow. The face was yellow and blue. Alleyn walked slowly towards the table. The area of light widened to take in an overturned cup and a bottle. Oh, God, said Macaulay. Oh, God, help me! Oh, God! Alleyn turned Macaulay round, marched him towards the door and propped him against the wall. He was sheet-white and trembling. Alleyn looked up and down the alley. Wait here a minute, he said. He ran through the pelting rain to the top of the alley, and about 200 yards away he saw a constable walking along the pavement towards him. Alleyn made himself known and sent the man off to the nearest telephone. Then he returned to Macaulay. It's all right, Macaulay. Sit down on this box. Here. He pulled a flask from his pocket and made Macaulay drink. I'm sorry I let you in for this, he said. Now wait here and don't admit anyone. When I've turned up the light at the back of this place, close the doors. Using his torch, Alleyn went back to the far end of the room. He found the light switch, turned it on, and heard Macaulay drag the doors together. The body was flaccid. The man was dressed in an old mackintosh and a pair of shabby grey trousers. The hands were relaxed, but their position suggested that they had clutched the edge of the table. The square fingertips were lightly crusted with dry clay, and the right thumb and forefinger was streaked with blue. On the backs of the hands, Alleyn saw sulphur-coloured patches. The mouth was torn, and a glance at the fingernails showed by what means. On the chin, the table, and the floor, Alleyn found further ghastly evidence of what had happened before the man died. Alleyn dropped his silk handkerchief over the head. He looked at the overturned bottle and cup. The bottle was marked clearly with a label bearing a scarlet cross. The floor was littered with broken china and with curiously shaped wooden tools, rather like enormous orange sticks. Alleyn looked at the feet. The shoes, though shabby and unpolished, had no mud on them. One foot was twisted round the chair leg. The other had been jammed against the leg of the table.
The whole posture suggested unspeakable torture. Alleyn turned to the packing case, pulled on his gloves and drew the bolt. The door opened smoothly, and inside the case, on a wheeled platform, was an irregularly shaped object that seemed to be swathed in cloths. Alleyn touched it. The cloths were still damp. "Comedy and tragedy," he murmured. He began to go over the floor. He found 1 or 2 strands of dark brown hair, and these he put in an envelope. Then he looked again at the head of the dead man. Voices sounded, the doors rattled open. Outside in the pouring rain was a police car and a mortuary van. Fox and Bailey stood in the doorway with Macaulay. Alleyn walked quickly towards them. "Hello, Fox." "Hello, sir. What's up?" Dr. Curtis, Alleyn's divisional surgeon, dived out of the car into the shelter. "What the devil have you found, Alleyn?" "Garcia," said Alleyn. "Here," ejaculated Fox. "Dead?" asked Curtis. "Very. I think he's taken nitric acid." "Good God," said Curtis. "Bloody loathsome way of committing suicide." He didn't know it was nitric acid. Accident? No. Murder. It was almost dark when they got back to the yard. Alleyn went straight to his room, followed by Fox. He dropped into an armchair. Fox switched on the light. "You want a drink, sir?" he said with a look at Alleyn. "I've got my emergency flask here." "Poured most of mine down Macaulay's gullet," said Alleyn. "Very well, Fox, thank you. Have one yourself, and let's be little devils together. Now then, where do we stand? You were very silent in that place of horror. Do you agree with my theory?" "Yes, sir, I do. I've been turning it over in my mind, and I don't see how any other theory will fit all the facts, most especially the tuft of hair torn from the scalp and found, as you might say, for the greater part on the floor." Fox briefly sucked in his short moustache and wiped his hand across his mouth. "You must have jerked him out very considerably," he said, "and have been held on to very determinedly." "Very. And I cannot believe a man in Garcia's condition could have gone through all the game with the caravan and the transport. We don't even know if he could drive. Oh, Lord, I'd better go along and tell the AC about this afternoon. Then I'll write up my report, and I think this evening we'd better go broody on this case." Alleyn had a long interview with his assistant commissioner, then wrote up his report and took Fox off to dine at his flat. After dinner they settled down over the fire to a systematic review of the whole case. At 11 o'clock, Nigel Bathgate turned up. "Hello," said Alleyn. "Get yourself a drink. How did you hit it off with Bobby O'Dawn?" "Ah, ha, ha! Wouldn't you like to know?" "We are not in the mood," said Alleyn, "for comedy." "All right. As a matter of fact, I'm afraid from your point of view the visit was not a howling success. I took her out to lunch and gave her champagne, for which I expect the yard to reimburse me. She got fairly chatty, but nothing much to the purpose. She said Garcia found out Sonia had told her about the Pilgrim game. Garcia was absolutely livid and said he'd do Sonia in if she couldn't hold her tongue. It was at this stage, Alleyn, that Bobby took another pull at her champagne and then said, 'So you see, dear, I can't say anything about Friday night. If he knows she told me, as sure as God's above us, he'll do for me too.' And then, as there was no more champagne, the party broke up." "Well, I'll pay for the champagne," said Alleyn. "Damn this girl, Fox. She knows who had the date with Garcia on Friday night." The telephone rang. Alleyn picked up the receiver. "Hello, yes?" "You sure?" "I see, thank you." He put down the receiver and looked at Fox. The hole on the cuff of Pilgrim's coat was made by an acid, probably nitric acid. The inquest on the body of Sonia Gluck was held at Bossicott on the morning of Thursday, September 22nd. The court was jammed to the doors. Otherwise, the proceedings were as colourless as the coroner, a gentleman with an air of irritated incredulity, could make them. He dealt roundly with the witnesses and with the evidence, reducing everything by a sort of sleight of hand to a dead norm. Alleyn gave formal evidence on the finding of Garcia's body and asked for an adjournment. The whole thing was over by 11 o'clock. In the corridor, Alleyn caught Fox by the arm. "Come on, Brer Fox. We're for Boxover. I've got my mother's car.
Looks less official.
In a very few minutes they were travelling down a fortunately deserted road at 50 miles an hour. Fox cleared his throat. "What's that, Brer Fox?" asked Alleyn.
"I didn't speak, Mr. Alleyn. Are we in a hurry?"
"Not particularly. I have a disposition of speed come upon me."
"I see," said Fox dryly.
Trees and hedges flew past in a grey blur. From the back of the car a muffled voice suddenly chanted,
"I thought I saw Inspector Alleyn hunting for a clue. I looked again and saw it was an inmate at the zoo. Good God, I said, it's very hard to judge between these two."
Alleyn took his foot off the accelerator. Fox slewed round and stared into the back of the car. From an upheaval of rugs, Nigel's head emerged.
"I thought," he continued, "I saw Gargantua in fancy worsted socks. I looked again and saw it was a mammoth picking locks. Good God, I said, it might have been my friend Inspector Fox."
"Rude is never funny," said Alleyn. "When did you hide in my mother's car?"
"Immediately after the old gentleman pronounced the word adjournment. Where are we bound for?"
"I shan't tell you. Sit down behind there." They arrived at Boxover and drew up outside a rather charming Georgian house on the outskirts of the village. 20 minutes, said Alleyn, looking from his watch to the speedometer. It's 2 miles from the studio to Bossicott. At night you could do the whole trip in a quarter of an hour or less. Now then, wait by the car until I give you a leery nod, both of you. He rang the front doorbell, and the door was opened by a manservant. Alleyn, with a grimace at them over his shoulder, stepped inside, leaving the door open.
"Come on, Mr. Bathgate," said Fox. "That means us."
They joined Alleyn in a little hall that was rather overwhelmed with the horns, masks, and hides of dead animals.
"Mrs. Pascoe is away," whispered Alleyn, "but the gallant captain is within. Here he comes."
Captain Pascoe was short, plump, and vague-looking. He had prominent light blue eyes and a red face. He smelt of whisky. "I'm sorry to bother you, Captain Pascoe," said Alleyn.
"That's all right. You from Scotland Yard, are you? This business over at Bossicott, what?"
"That's it. We're checking up everybody's movements on the night in question. You'll understand it has to be done."
"Oh, quite. Routine, what? Have a drink?"
Thank you so much, but I think we'll get on with the job." Alleyn led him through the weekend from the moment when Valmy Seacliff and Pilgrim arrived up to the time they all sat down to dinner. Now, I understand that during dinner Miss Seacliff complained of a headache.
No, not till after dinner. Minor point, but we may as well be accurate, Inspector."
"Certainly, sir. Stupid of me. Was it about the time you had coffee that she first spoke of it?"
"No. I remember Valmy made a face over her coffee, took a swig at it, and then did a sort of shudder, and my wife said, 'What's up?' or words to the same effect. Val said the coffee was bitter, and then Pilgrim looked a bit sheepish, and I said, 'Was yours bitter?' And he said, 'Matter of fact, it was.' Funny, mine was all right. Pilgrim persuaded her to have a glass of port after champagne, and she said at the time it would upset her. She's a lovely thing. Damn good rider to hounds. Lovely hounds. Goes as straight and well as the best of 'em. Look at that."
He fumbled in a drawer of his writing desk and produced a press photograph of Valmy Seacliff looking magnificent on a hunter. Captain Pascoe gloated over it, handed it to Alleyn, and flung himself back in his chair.
"Not till after dinner that she talked about feeling under the weather."
"And then," said Alleyn, "I believe you played bridge?"
"Yes, that's right. But by that time Val was looking very seedy and said her head was splitting, so after 2 or 3 hands we chucked it up and wife took Val up to her room."
"Gave her some aspirin, perhaps?"
"No. Pilgrim rushed off and got some aspirin for her. Anxious about her as an old hen. She took the bottle up with her. My wife tucked her up and went to her own room. Pilgrim and I had a whisky and soda and turned in. That was at 10:30. I wound up the clocks, and we went and had a look at Val. Naughty little thing hadn't taken her aspirin. Said it made her sick trying to swallow. So Pilgrim dissolved 3 in water, and she promised she'd take 'em. My wife looked in later and found her sound asleep. We were all tucked up and snoozing by 11, I should think."
Alleyn asked to see the bedrooms. Captain Pascoe mixed himself another drink and escorted them over the house.
"Yeah, Val had this one, and that fellow was next door, what?"
He sat on the edge of Valmay's bed and finished his drink. He glared round the room, sucking his upper lip.
"Tchah!" he said suddenly. "Look at that. Disgraceful. Staff work in this house is abominable. Maids away."
He pointed unsteadily to the mantelpiece.
"Abominable. Never been touched. Look at this."
He turned his eye on the bedside table. A dirty table napkin lay on top of a row of books. Underneath it was a tumbler holding 3 fingers of murky fluid.
That's been there since Friday night, I mean.
Alleyn slipped in front of him. Maddening, that sort of thing. I wonder if we might see Mr. Pilgrim's room, sir.
By George, we'll see every room in this house,
shouted Captain Pascoe. Alleyn followed him, looked over his shoulder at Fox, raised his left eyebrow, and disappeared. To Nigel's surprise, Fox said,
"Wait here, Mr. Bathgate, please,"
then darted out of the room and reappeared in about a minute. Fox, with surprising dexterity and speed, whipped a small, wide-necked bottle from his pocket, poured the contents of the tumbler into it, corked it, and wrapped the tumbler up in his handkerchief.
"Now, sir, if you'll take those down and put them in the chief's car, quickly does it."
When Nigel got back, he found that Captain Pascoe, accompanied by Alleyn and Fox, had returned to the hall and was yelling for his servant. The captain suddenly collapsed into an armchair, showed signs of drowsiness, and appeared to lose all interest in his visitors. Alleyn spoke to the servant. "We are police officers and are making a few inquiries about the affair at Bossicott. Will you show us the garage, please?" "Very good, sir," said the man stolidly. He showed them a double garage about 200 yards down the lane. Captain Pascoe's Morris Cowley occupied less than half the floor space. "Ah, yes," said Alleyn. "I suppose now that Mr. Pilgrim's car fitted in very comfortably?" "Oh, yes, sir." "Nice car, isn't it?" "Very nice job, sir. Tiger on petrol, sir." "Really? What makes you think that?" "Well, sir, I asked the gentleman on Saturday morning was she all right for petrol, and he said yes, she was filled up as full as she'd go in Bossicott. Well, sir, I looked at the gauge, and she'd eaten up 2 gallons coming over here. 12 miles, sir, no more. I looked to see if she was leaking, but she wasn't." "Thank you very much," said Alleyn. "I think that's all." "Thank you very much indeed, sir," said the man, closing his hand gratefully. Alleyn, Fox, and Nigel returned to their car and drove away. "Get that tumbler, Fox?" asked Alleyn. "Yes, sir, and the liquid. Are you going to have the stuff analysed?" "Yes, damn quick about it, too, if possible." "And what then?" "Why then," said Alleyn, "we'll be within sight of an arrest." The analyst's report on the contents of the tumbler came through at 9:30 that evening. The fluid contained a solution of Bayer's aspirin, approximately 3 tablets. The glass bore a clear imprint of Basil Pilgrim's fingers and thumb. When Alleyn had read the analyst's report, he rang up his assistant commissioner, had a long talk with him, and then sent for Fox. "There's one thing we must make sure of," he said wearily, "and that's the position of the light on the figure outside the studio window. Our game with the string wasn't good enough. We'll have to get something a bit more positive, Brer Fox." So, for the last time, Alleyn and Fox drove through the night to Tatler's End House. The Bossicott church clock struck midnight as Fox took up his old position outside the studio window. Alleyn walked down the lane and returned in a few minutes. "Fox," he said, "the ray of light that comes through the hole in the blind alights upon your bosom. I think we are on the right track." At 10 o'clock the next morning, 2 police cars drove up to Tatler's End House. Alleyn, Fox, and 2 plainclothesmen went up the steps to the front door. The butler showed them into Troy's library. "I think, Fox, if you don't mind," said Alleyn.
"Certainly, sir. We'll wait in the hall."
Troy came in. "Good morning," said Alleyn, and his smile contradicted the formality of his words. "I thought you might prefer to see us before we go any further." "Yes. You are going to make an arrest, aren't you?" "I think we shall probably do so. I'm glad you decided to lunch with my mother. It will be easier for you to get right away from everything. I suggest that you drive over there now." Troy's chin went up. "Thank you," she said. "It's very kind of you to think of me, but however illogically, I would feel as if I was funking something if I went away before you did. I've got my students to think of. You must see that. I shan't make a nuisance of myself." "You know perfectly well that ever since I met you, you have made a nuisance of yourself. You've made my job 100% more difficult because you have taken possession of my thoughts as well as my heart. And now you go off to your students and think that over. I want to speak to Pilgrim, if you please." Troy gazed bleakly at him. Then she bit her lips, and Alleyn saw that her eyes were full of tears. Oh, hell and damnation, he said.
It's all right, I'm going. Shut up,
mumbled Troy, and went. Fox came in and joined Alleyn at the fire. They waited in silence until Basil Pilgrim came in with one of the yardmen. The second man walked in after them and stood inside the door. "Good morning," said Pilgrim. "Good morning, Mr. Pilgrim. We would like to clear up one or two points relating to your former statement and to our subsequent investigations." "Certainly." Alleyn consulted his notebook. "What does your car do to the gallon?" he asked. 16? Sure of that? Yes, she may do a bit more on long runs. Right. Now, if you please, we'll go back to Friday evening during your visit to Captain and Mrs. Pascoe. Can you tell us who poured out and who handed round the coffee? Do you mean about Val's coffee being bitter? Mine was bitter too, beastly. You both took black coffee? Yes. And sugar? And sugar. Who put the sugar in the coffee? Good Lord, I don't know. I believe I did. You didn't say anything about your coffee being bitter. I didn't like to. I gave Val a look and made a face, and she nodded. She said, "Sybil, darling, your coffee is perfectly frightful." Val is always terribly direct. Later on, when Miss Seacliff complained of feeling unwell, you gave her some aspirin, didn't you? Yes. Was the bottle of aspirins in your pocket? I went upstairs and got it out of my suitcase. When did you actually give Miss Seacliff the aspirins? When she went to bed. Did she take them? Not then. We looked in after she was in bed, and she said she could never swallow aspirins, and so I dissolved 3 in water and left the tumbler by her bedside. Did you see her drink this solution? No, Where's the bottle? I suppose it's in my room upstairs. After you left Miss Seacliff's room on Friday night, where did you go? I had a drink with Pascoe and went to bed. You slept straight through the night? Like the dead, said Pilgrim. I suppose I had a bit too much of Pascoe's 1875 Courvoisier. I see. Now, Mr. Pilgrim, I want you to look at this, if you please. He nodded to one of his men, who came forward with a brown paper parcel. He opened it, and took out a most disreputable garment. Why, said Pilgrim, that's my old car coat. Yes, I want you to tell me when you burnt this little hole in the cuff there, do you see? How the devil shall I know? I've had that thing for donkey's years. It's obviously a cigarette burn. It's an acid burn. Acid? Might it be nitric acid? Why? Do you do any etching, Mr. Pilgrim? Yes, but not in my garage coat. Look here, Mr. Alleyn. Will you feel in the pockets? Pilgrim thrust a hand into one of the pockets and pulled out a pair of gloves. If you look at the back of the right-hand glove, said Alleyn, you will see among all the greasy stains and worn patches another very small mark. Look at it, please. There. It is exceedingly small, but it, too, was made by an acid. Can you account for it? Quite frankly, I can't. I see. Have you ever lent this coat to anyone else? Has anyone else ever worn the gloves? I don't know, they may have. He looked up quickly, and his eyes were suddenly bright with terror. I think it's quite likely I've lent it, he said, or a garage hand might have put it on sometime, easily. It may be acid from a battery. Have you ever lent it to Miss Seacliff, for instance? Never. It's an old riding Burberry, isn't it? Yes. You didn't lend it to her to hack in at your father's house, Ankerton, during the weekend? Good Lord, no. Valmay has got very smart riding clothes of her own. Not even the gloves? Pilgrim achieved a laugh. Those gloves? I'd just given Valmay 6 pairs of coloured gloves, which she tells me are fashionable. She was so thrilled she even lunched in purple gloves and dined in scarlet ones. I mean to ride in. She had her own hunting gloves. What is all this? She goes well to hounds, doesn't she? Straight as the best. Yes. What sort of horse did you mount her on? A hunter, one of mine. Clubbed mane and tail? Yes. Look inside the right-hand glove at the base of the little finger. Do you see that bloodstain? I see a small stain. It's been analysed. It is a bloodstain. Do you remember recently cutting or scratching the base of your little finger? Yes, I think I do. How did it happen? I forget. I think it was at Ankerton, on a bramble or something. And you had these gloves with you at the time? I suppose so, yes. I thought you said the gloves and coat always lived in the car. It is rather absurd to go on with this, Pilgrim said. I'm afraid I must refuse to answer any more questions. You're perfectly within your rights. Fox, ask Miss Seacliff if she will be good enough to come in. Thank you, Mr. Pilgrim. Will you wait outside? No, said Pilgrim. I'm going to hear what you say to her. Alleyn hesitated. Very well, he said at last. He dropped the coat and gloves behind the desk. Valmay Seacliff arrived in her black slacks and magenta pullover. She made, as usual, a good entrance, shutting the door behind her and leaning against it for a moment to survey the men. Hello, she said. More investigations? What's the matter with you, Basil? You look as if you'd murdered somebody. Pilgrim didn't answer. Alleyn said, I have sent for you, Miss Seacliff, to know if you can help us. But I should adore to help you, Mr. Alleyn. Did you drink the solution of aspirin that Mr. Pilgrim prepared for you on Friday night? Not all of it. It was too bitter. But you said before that you drank it. Well, I did have a sip. I slept all right without it. How is your cut hand? Oh, it's quite recovered. May I see it, please? She held it out with the same gesture that she had used on Monday night, but this time the fingers trembled. Below the base of the little finger there was still a very thin reddish scar. You told me that you cut your hand on your horse's mane, said Alleyn. No, you told me that, Mr. Alleyn. You accepted the explanation. Did I? How do you say now that you cut your hand? I did it on the reins. Mr. Pilgrim, did you see this cut on Saturday evening? It must have been quite sore then, sharp, thin cut. I didn't see her hand. She wore gloves. All through dinner? Scarlet gloves. They looked lovely, she said. Didn't they, Basil? Do you remember that on Monday night you told me you had no pretensions to being a good horsewoman? Modesty, Mr. Alleyn. Alleyn turned aside. He moved behind the desk, stooped, and in a second the old raincoat and the gloves were lying on the top of the desk. Have you ever seen those before? Asked Alleyn. It's Basil's, isn't it? Come and look at it. She walked slowly across to the desk and looked at the coat and gloves. Alleyn picked up the sleeve and without speaking pointed a long forefinger to the acid hole in the cuff. He lifted the collar and turned it back and pointed to a whitish stain. He dropped the coat, took up the left-hand glove and turned it inside out. He pointed to a small stain under the base of the little finger. And still he did not speak. It was Basil Pilgrim who broke the silence. I don't know what he's driving at, Val, but you've never worn the things. I know you haven't. I told him so. I'll swear it. I'll swear you've never worn them. I know you haven't. You bloody fool! She screamed. You bloody fool! Valmay Seacliff, began Alleyn, I arrest you for the murder of Wolf Garcia. Troy sat on a rug in the central grass plot of Lady Alleyn's rose garden. Alleyn stood and looked down at her. You see, he said, it was a very clumsy, messy and ill-planned murder. It seemed the most awful muddle, but it boils down to a fairly simple narrative. We hadn't much doubt after Monday night that Garcia had set the trap for Sonia. He left his prints on the opium jar, and as Malmsey had prepared the first pipe, Garcia evidently gave himself another. He must have been in a state of partial recovery with a sort of exalted carryover when he got the idea of jamming the knife through the floor of the throne. Motive? Sonia had been badgering him to marry her. She was going to have his child and wouldn't let him alone. She came between him and his work. She probably threatened to sue him for maintenance to make a full-sized scandal. The opium suggested a beautifully simple and macabre way out of it all. I saw Sonia's friend in the chorus, Miss O'Dorn, again this morning after the arrest. I got a rather fuller account of the blackmailing game. Sonia and Garcia were both in it. Sonia had tackled Pilgrim and threatened to tell the Methodist peer that Basil was the father of her child. He wasn't, but that made no odds. Basil stumped up and Sonia handed the cash to Garcia. We found a note from Garcia to Valmay Seacliff in which he coolly said he'd bought painting materials at her shop and put them down to her. The wording of the letter suggested that he had some sort of upper hand over her, and when I first saw Bobby O'Dorn she obviously had information up her sleeve and admitted as much. She told Bathgate that Sonia had said Garcia would kill both of them if they babbled. When Sonia died, Bobby O'Dorn was certain Garcia had done it, and that she'd be the next victim if she didn't keep quiet. Now he's dead, and
We've got Valmay Seacliff. Miss O'Dorn is all for a bit of front-page publicity and told me this morning that Sonia had kept her au fait with the whole story. Garcia blackmailed Valmay Seacliff. He said he'd tell Basil Pilgrim that she'd been his, Garcia's, mistress. He said he'd go to the Methodist pier with a story of studio parties that would throw the old boy into a righteous fury and completely cook Seacliff's goose. Garcia worked the whole thing out with Sonia. She was to tackle Pilgrim while he went for Valmay Seacliff. Garcia had started to work with Seacliff, who at first wouldn't rise. But he'd done some drawings of Seacliff in the nude, which he said he'd send to old Pilgrim with a suitable letter, and he told her that Sonia was also prepared to do her bit of blackmail as well. At last, Valmay Seacliff, terrified of losing Pilgrim, said she'd meet Garcia on Friday night in the studio when they were all safely away and discuss payment. All this Garcia told Sonia, and Sonia told Bobby O'Dorn, swearing her to secrecy. O'Dorn was too frightened of Garcia to tell me the Seacliff side, and I also think she honestly felt she couldn't break her word. She's got a sort of code, that funny, hard little baggage, and she stuck to it. But of course, without her evidence, we'd got no motive as far as Seacliff was concerned. When did you suspect Valmay? I wasn't very certain until I saw that the person who murdered Garcia had held his head back by the hair and that he had struggled so hard that he had struggled. I then remembered the cut on Seacliff's hand, and how she had shown it to me only when she saw me looking at it, and how she had said it had been made by her horse's reins when it had obviously been made by something much finer. But to go back a bit, from the moment we learnt that it was Seacliff who posed the model, I felt that we must watch her pretty closely. I don't understand that. You say Garcia set the trap with the knife. Yes, but I believe Seacliff watched him through a hole in the studio window blind. Seacliff? Yes. She had put 3 aspirins in Pilgrim's coffee to ensure his sleeping soundly. When she realized he had noticed the coffee tasted odd, he made a face at her, she quickly raised an outcry about her own. She pretended to have a headache in order to get them all to bed early. She slipped out to the garage, wearing slacks and a sweater, put on Pilgrim's old coat and gloves, and drove back to the studio, getting there about midnight, with the intention of arguing about blackmail with Garcia. This was the meeting Miss Phillida Lee overheard Sonia discussing with Garcia. Sonia told Miss Bobby O'Dorn all about it, and Miss O'Dorn told me this morning. But you should remember that until this morning Miss O'Dorn had only elaborated what we already knew, the Pilgrim-Sonia side. However, I give you the whole thing as completely as I can. Valmay Seacliff arrived at the studio in a desperate attempt to placate Garcia. She must have left the car somewhere in the lane and walked down, meaning to come in at the side gate. Your maid Ethel and her boy, returning from the flicks, saw the figure of a shortish man standing outside the studio window, apparently looking through the hole in the blind. He wore a mackintosh with the collar turned up. The ray of light caught his beret, which was pulled down on one side, hiding his face. Both Garcia and Pilgrim were too tall for the light to get them anywhere above the chest. So was Malmsley. Seacliff seemed to be the only one about the right height. When we saw Pilgrim's old coat in his car, we noticed whitish marks on the collar that suggested face or neck powder, and they smelt of Seacliff. It was so dirty it didn't seem likely she would let him embrace her while he was wearing it. When we looked inside the left-hand glove, we noticed a bloodstain that corresponded with the cut on her hand. That, of course, came into the picture after the Garcia affair. I believe that she actually watched Garcia set his trap for Sonia, and decided to say nothing about it. I believe she went in, probably got him to drink a good deal more whiskey, and offered to drive him up to London. You told me he did a little etching. Yes, he prepared a plate a few days before he went. Then perhaps he said he'd take the acid to bite it. Is that the right word? Anyway, she got out your caravan, backed it up to the window, and there's a slope down from the garage, enough to freewheel into the lane and start on compression. The servants wouldn't think anything odd if they heard a car in the lane. Malmsley had helped Garcia get everything ready. All she had to do was open the window, wheel the clay model over the sill into the caravan, get Garcia aboard, and start off. The packing case had already been addressed by Garcia, so she knew the address, even if he was incapable of directing her. I think myself that he had told her exactly where the warehouse was when he asked her to go there to see him.
and she has admitted that he gave her a sketch map. Probably his idea was she should pay blackmail to him while he was there. She made another rather interesting slip over that. She told me that as soon as she heard the word Holloway, she remembered that Garcia had said his warehouse was near the prison, and she had told him to be careful he didn't get locked up. Holloway is a woman's prison. Her very feeble joke would have been a little less feeble if he was blackmailing her, and the place of assignation was not Holloway, but Brixton. By giving us Holloway as the district, she was sending us off in exactly the opposite direction to the right one. We might have hunted round Holloway for weeks. I wondered if she had been the victim of a sort of word association, and I decided to go for Brixton. Luckily enough, as it turned out. As a matter of fact, she had twice fallen into the trap of substituting for truth something that is linked with it in her mind. The first time was over the cut on her hand. It had been made when she was standing above Garcia with her hand wound in his hair. She saw me looking at the scar, decided to speak of it before I did, was perhaps reminded subconsciously of horse's hair, a mane gripped in the hand, rejected the idea of hair altogether and substituted reins. Have you had enough of this, Troy? No, I want to know all about it. There's not much more. She drove Garcia to his warehouse. He'd got the keys. She murdered him there because she was hell-bent on marrying Pilgrim and becoming a very rich peeress, and because it was in Garcia's power to stop her. She's an egomaniac. She drove the caravan back to your garage and drove herself back to the Pascoe's house in Pilgrim's car. The distance to the warehouse is 30 miles. At that time of night, she'd do it easily in an hour and a half. She must have been back at the studio by 3 and probably got to the Pascoe's by past. Even supposing she lost her way, and I don't think she would, because there's a good map in the caravan, she'd a margin of 2 hours before there was a chance of the servants being about. And I'm finishing up where I began. She murdered Sonia, knowing the knife was there, as deliberately as she murdered Garcia. Will they find her guilty? I don't know, Troy. Her behaviour when we arrested her was pretty damning. She turned on Pilgrim like a wildcat because he kept saying he'd swear she'd never worn the coat. If he'd said she had often worn it, half our case would have gone up in smoke. Alleyn was silent for a moment and then knelt down on the rug beside Troy. Has this all made a great difference to you? He said. Is it going to take you a long time to put it behind you? I don't know. It's been a bit of a shock for all of us. For Pilgrim, yes. The others will be dining out on it in no time. Not you. I think I'm sort of stunned. It's not that I liked any of them much, it's just the feeling of all the vindictiveness in the house. So disquieting to remember what Seacliffe's thoughts must have been during the last week. I almost feel I ought to have a priest in with a bell and a book to purify the house. And now, the thought of the trial is unspeakably shocking. I don't know where I am. She turned helplessly towards Alleyn, and in a moment she was in his arms. No, said Troy. You mustn't think... I know. Alleyn held her strongly. He could feel her heart beating secretly against his own. Everything about him, the trees, the ground beneath him, and the clouds in the still autumn sky rose like bright images in his mind and vanished in a wave of exultation. He was alone in the world with her, and with that moment of supremacy before him came the full assurance that he must not take it. He knew quite certainly that he must let his moment go by. Shall I tell you what I think? I think that if we had met again in a different way, you might have loved me. But because of all that has happened, your thoughts of me are spoiled. There's an association of cold and rather horrible officiousness. Well, perhaps it's not quite as bad as all that, but my job has come between us. You know, at first I thought you disliked me very much. You were so prickly. Then I began to hope a little. Don't cry, dear Troy. It's a great moment for me, this. Don't think I misunderstand. You so nearly love me, don't you? So nearly. Then I shall still allow myself to hope a little.